Hi, I'm Bob Wilder. I was one of the residents of Enfield, Massachusetts, a small hamlet just to the north of the town itself, and it lies right behind us, right in the Narrows, where the 2 points of land come together as Smith's Village. And I lived there until 1938. In 1938, this evil force from the east came along and said, "You have to go." Now, we were small. I was very young at the time, just 9 years old. And we had to leave. We were farmers. And it was such a shattering thing to have to pick up and go somewhere else and try to be a farmer somewhere else. My perspectives were completely different than that of my parents and my grandparents and my great-grandparents, because our family had been in the valley in 3 of the 4 towns since before the Revolutionary War. So our roots were very deep here. Our sentiments are strong today, and here we are 60 years later. We're still very sad about what happened. The people who lived down along the valley, along the river, along the center branch of the Swift River, they worked in the mills. And when the jobs moved and the mills closed down, they went to the surrounding towns of Ware and Ludlow and Palmer, and they found employment. We were farmers, and we left here and we had to find farms to have employment. And you have to understand, it was deep in the Depression, the Second World War had not begun, and opportunities just weren't there for us. So the end result was that the farm community was the embittered community. They didn't get over it. They still haven't gotten over it, and we still don't talk in friendly terms, if you will, to that, whatever it is, to the east of us here. However, there has been a general forgiveness as time goes on and people get older, and more sensitivity is displayed by the folks from the east who come here now, and they visit, and they appreciate not only this wonderful wilderness and this beautiful body of water, but they come and they talk to us, just like you folks are doing. They pick up a little bit of the human side of this story that brought rivers of tears through the generations. It just didn't stop in 1938. Our family was torn apart and continued to be torn apart to this day as a result of that. Our little farm sits on Prescott Peninsula, right off Point Ram, 1.5 miles up the hill. The boarding house is 65 feet underwater. You can see Monadnock just faintly in the distance. It'll give you a little bit of perspective. On the farm, all the foundations are still there. The family dump is still there behind the stone wall. My dad's first bicycle sits on the wall. My grandmother's buggy is still there. It's rotted and fallen onto the stone wall. The horseshoe still rests where the barn used to be. I visit that several times a year. I go to my old neighborhood, and we're able to relive the things that we relived then. Neat things happened there. The only black family in the valley were our next door neighbors. That was Charlie Smith. His dad was a slave, George, brought out of the South after the Civil War. And Charlie, and we ended up having these $1-a-day kids down to help us out. When we lost all the males in our family and only the kids were left, and there were 4 young kids to run the farm, then these $1-a-day people were very, very helpful to us. And it was interesting that long after we left here, these people searched us out and found us to come and reestablish these ties, like, I worked on your farm 15 years ago or 20 years ago. I'm Raymond Carter. Do you remember me? And this sort of thing, you see? Well, I guess that's pretty much what I've got to tell you. I went on from here into aerospace, and I worked on the lunar lander, and I retired from aerospace, and I taught at Old Sturbridge Village for a great number of years, and now I spend the rest of my life working with school children doing historic tours of the 17th and 18th century New England. Thank you.
I think it's just terrific. Thank you very much.
Oh, I didn't get into
your
my
name and your address.
I didn't get into my yes, you did. My address is Brookfield, Massachusetts. You didn't take that.
Well, I want to send you an invitation.
Oh, okay. I'm Bob Wilder, and I live in Brookfield, Massachusetts. That's it.
Your mailing address?
Box 514-01506 is the zip. Okay.
Now, you didn't get a chance to get into your real spiel, did you?
No, I didn't.
I got film.
Well, you know, I did this. I made a movie.
I got film.
I made several movies for Old Sturbridge Village, and it's circulating all over the country now. Yeah. I didn't get into it because some of these things may border on things that we don't talk about.
Well,
but well, okay. You got it on?
Change the film.
Okay.
All right. Yeah, I'll tell you something. This is going in this.
You all set? Well, if you notice that small hill just behind us and just below the highest peak you see there, little Quabbin in the 1920s and 1930s, they used to hold weekly motorcycle races there. And a brand new competitor showed up there in the 20s, and that was Harley Davidson. They began to compete with the Springfield motorcycles, which was the Indian motorcycle of the time. So that was an event, and usually when you could, everyone went to the hill climbs on Sunday during the warm weather. So anyway, this was one of the events. The social events in town primarily centered around the Grange and around holidays. And this was a time when women dressed and did their best, and I can remember the young guys trying to be typical Beau Brummels of the time, parting your hair down the middle and putting on straw hats and trying to raise mustaches to look like Rudolph Valentino and the actors of the times, and those that couldn't grow mustaches drew them on their faces, you know, strictly to impress the ladies. Down in the valley, when we moved down there, my dad met this young woman, and that was before I came along. She was an Abenaki Indian who had come out of Maine, and she joined her grandfather, who worked down here at the Smith's Mills in Smith's Village. And so consequently, as a result of that liaison, I was born. And so we began to spend more time, the family began to spend more time down in Smith's Village than we did on the hillside. But, you know, the favorite supply of characters seemed to follow us. When we lived on the hillside, there was a family of Newberrys lived up there, and these were field people. These were people who lived off the land. As a matter of fact, they were even rumored to have stolen the old German couple's house after they died, moved it across the road. And they had one of the Newberrys, his name was Bill, had a big bushy head of hair and a large beard, and he carried a huge black crow on his shoulder. This guy here was known throughout the valley as a barn burner. If you had an argument with Bill and you won the argument, within a few months you would lose one of your buildings. So, you know, whenever he came around, we were cautioned. We told him how much we liked him. We always liked Bill a lot. We believed everything he said. None of us ever argued with this fellow. But in addition, this Bill had a brother. His name was Ernest. We called him Hunk because he had this enormous hunchback, and his face was, I would say, 18 inches long and pulled to the side, and he talked so you couldn't quite make out what he said. So we figured he was illiterate. We used to pick on him, and we'd throw cans at him. Years and years later, when we left the valley and moved over into a little town of Warren, Unc showed up in Warren, and he lived in the house behind our house. And then we discovered this man was very articulate, he was very bright, he was very sensitive and very deep feeling, and to this day there's so much remorse for having picked on him. But he was a source of enjoyment for years and years and years. We plagued him, and he moved from valley to valley, from town to town, and spent his entire life begging cigarettes and something to eat. He never worked a day in his life. This was how this gentleman was. And my old grandfather, Harry Turner, he lived down near the schoolhouse in Smith's Village. Again, we're back down into the smallest possible space you can see between the land masses down there. And he didn't want to leave. In '38, when it came time to go, he said no. He was not going to go. And he said, I'll leave this valley when the last dog is hung. Now, none of us knew what that meant, but we know that one day in May, Grandpa Turner came and he said, the last dog's hung and I saw it. And what we didn't know was they blew up the dam and the water was rising. He didn't have a choice. He had to leave the valley. So I think that's what Grandpa meant when he said that. But down in the valley there were many other characters. Over in Greenwich Village, Greenwich Plains, you just heard Chet talk. He came from up that way. And Dickinson had a post office and kind of a little rural country store up in Greenwich Plains, and they used to have a man they called an Onion Man, and this fellow here, he really wasn't very sanitary. He rarely bathed. He delivered onions, so I don't suppose there was any advantage to bathing, but at any rate, he would deliver these huge wagon loads with his horse of onions around to the various dealers. And he spent more time with his horse and his wagon and onions than he did anywhere else. And when it got cold, he would come into Dickinson's store. And in the middle of Dickinson's store, and it was a post office in Greenwich Plains, was this huge barrel of a stove. And the folks would sit around that, and like many of the shows you see today, poking fun, I think, at earlier times, the guys would play checkers, and they would talk and smoke. And this onion man would come in there, and he'd lean back in his chair, and he'd sort of douse off. And as it got warmer, needless to say, you had the combination of an unwashed man and all this onions, and pretty soon people would be getting his chair and moving it further and further in the stove, an inch at a time, and he'd sort of come to and then go back to sleep. And by the time it was done, he was over by the door, and he'd wake up with this really amazed look at his face, like, how did all this happen? And never have an inkling what was going on. Well, this is the nature of the human beings that we had. Mary Walker, she was the first woman to be decorated with the Congressional Medal of Honor. She had her summer home here in Greenwich. Now, Dr. Mary Walker was a little short woman. She was defiant. Boy, she was defiant. She wore pants when ladies didn't do those things, and she did. Anyway, she was a doctor during the Civil War, and she was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. Boy, she was a spicy rascal. She said whatever was on her mind. And whenever she came to Greenwich and would go to the store, they would have a run on shoelaces. And the reason they'd have a run on shoelaces were about the cheapest thing you could buy in the store. For a nickel, you could get a pair of shoelaces. And everyone that could came to the store, and you couldn't come there just to stare. You had to come there on business. And people would line up to buy these shoelaces just to get a look at Dr. Mary Walker. Well, in its, I think, as so frequently happens, the government decided, well, she's too outspoken, she's too this, she's too that, and they found reasons to take her Medal of Honor away. And they did. And they never reissued her Medal of Honor till within the last 20 years. It was reissued to her posthumously, and she got it back for all of these wonderful deeds that she had accomplished during the war. So you see, we have these wonderful characters. Let me tell you about another character whose family came from here, and we still talk about him today and don't realize that we are. Down in Enfield, there was a Four Corners down by the hotel, and if you branched off there, you would come to the old Hooker farm. Well, the old Hooker farm was there for ages, and they had a grandson, Joseph. Well, Gentleman Joe Hooker was a Civil War soldier. He was a Civil War general. You probably hear of him often. If you watch Ken Burns' wonderful tale of the Civil War, you'll hear about Gentleman Joe Hooker. But what they don't tell you is when Joe Hooker went to the field, he never went alone. He took a parcel of young women with him for his own entertainment and amusement. And they began to call him Hooker's girls. And surprising enough, they still have some Hooker's girls around today. And this is a legitimate story. Well, Gentleman Joe. Are we still on?
Oh, gee. What a time I'm having, huh?
It's got to be.
Yeah, great.
Okay.
Yep. You're still on.
Okay, I'm still on. Well, Gentleman Joe fell from favor, but his girls never did. So anyway, Gentleman Joe is also a topic of pride somewhat, in that he was one of the descendants from our valley. Yes, you want me to continue?
One quick second. I'm keeping them all over. It doesn't bother
Oh,
me.
no, I'll go.
Do you have to leave?
I have to prepare a presentation for tomorrow, so yeah.
Okay.
Why don't I go?
Well, yeah, I'm having fun. You have to leave?
Not yet. In a
Carol?
little while.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Hey, thank
yeah,
you.
I've got to do my speech.
Yeah, go ahead. Go do it. Yeah, don't flub it. Whatever you do.
Bye-bye. Nice meeting you.
Hey, bye-bye.
Yes. Hey, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Yes, it's been a pleasure.
I'll see you
Soon, real quick. I want you to come over and help edit.
those names and addresses are in your bag.
Thank you.
Listen, why don't we wrap this up and
Okay,
we'll
you
go,
can wrap it.
because
Put a wrap on it.
oh, well, I think perhaps sum total of everything that I've said today is that I think I can say it nicely. Eleanor Griswold lived on my great-great-grandmother's farm just down the road between Enfield and Prescott. She died this spring at the age of 92. Eleanor said, you know, she says, Boston has water But we have such sweet memories. That's a wrap.